do is I'm going to start the recording. All right, let me try that again. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Sasko River Center's Parent Discussion Series. Today, we have Daniel Glass, doctor, and Margot LaPointe, and we will be discussing perfectionism, causes, and management. I'm going to let them describe how they'd like questions presented, meaning in the chat or unmute or at the end. That's up to them. I'll let them decide. I will be sharing the recording of this and the PDF of the materials after the presentation. You'll get that today or tomorrow. And I will also be moderating the chat box. So if I see anything pop up, I'll see what's appropriate to interject or not. But at the moment, let me hand it over to, let's see, who's going to go first? Margot, you go first.
Yep. Good morning, everyone. Today, we're going to be talking about perfectionisms and the causes and managements. My name is Margot LaPointe. I am the head of the Learning Services Department at Sasko River Center. I have my master's in education, and I'm a certified professional coach. And I also am an executive functions coach at the center. And I'm going to let Dan introduce himself.
My name is Dan Glass. I am a psychologist. I work here at Sasko River Center doing psychotherapy and psychoeducational evaluations. My main area of expertise for therapy is anxiety disorders, OCD, and I also do some parent work as well.
Uh-oh. It's not moving. Sorry, everyone. There we go. I'm going to pull it all up for you, Dan.
You can try the arrows on the keyboard as well.
It didn't work.
No? Oh.
All right, Dan, you're on.
I didn't say it would work. I said you can try it.
Right, so today we're going to talk about perfectionism is the main topic, and we're going to discuss a lot of the related concepts, talking about how stress and anxiety relate to perfectionism, maybe in some ways that are obvious and maybe in some ways that you never thought of before. We'll talk about how perfectionism can play a concrete role in impacting functioning, and the very complex relationship between procrastination and perfectionism. And then we'll talk about some strategies for overcoming them.
Okay, so we're going to start off with what is perfectionism, and talking about how this is like really a personal standard or an attitude or philosophy that demands something to be perfect and rejecting anything else that isn't. People who suffer from perfectionism hold themselves to these impossibly high standards. They think that whatever they do isn't good enough. And sometimes people think, oh, wow, if you're a perfectionist, that you have like a healthy motivator, but it's not necessarily the case because it can make you feel unsatisfied and really unhappy. Oh, sorry, I'm going to interject really quickly. If you have questions, comments, or anything, please feel free to jump right in and ask.
All right, everyone, and feel free to also, I just sent a message if you'd like to put them in the chat as well. We can also address them either at the end if they're applicable to a more broader kind of scope, or in the moment if they are applicable at the moment. Here are just some examples of how perfectionism can come across. Imagine a 14-year-old girl, let's call her Mary, taking a extremely long time on her homework. Maybe she should take about 15 minutes to do a post online, but instead she spends about 3 to 4 hours checking the homework, a very small sort of barely graded sort of work before turning it in. That would be an example of perfectionism. Imagine Tom, who is 45 years old and has created a presentation for work, and because he can't get some of the animations to display properly on the slideshow, he scraps the entire thing and maybe even skips work that day. I also have seen perfectionism in high schoolers who are correcting or constantly rewriting work, papers they're writing, rereading lines over and over again because they feel like they did not quite get out of it what they should have gotten as they read, or they didn't quite form the letters in the correct way or type the sentence in the correct way, and can really have difficulty just getting that to say, okay, I think this is fine. I'm gonna turn it in. And another common sort of manifestation of this would be somebody being extraordinarily averse to making a mistake in front of other people, being corrected, receiving any sort of feedback, even if it's constructive feedback, just being what we might call overly sensitive to that sort of feedback, because it appears as if someone is telling them they're not good enough. That's how they feel. So those are all manifestations of perfectionism in everyday life.
And something that I see as an executive function coach a lot is in writing. That I see a lot of my clients get stuck and stay where they are and are unable to move forward, and continue to stay where they are for a long period of time, to the point where they're not able to finish what they've started.
So you often see perfectionism alongside clinical anxiety disorders. But you can also see it in anxiety that's not clinical, right? So the way to think of perfectionism, it is both a cause and an effect of stress and anxiety. And you can see how this cycle might form as somebody engages in perfectionistic tendencies, which make them feel more and more anxious. But perfectionism also stems from anxiety in a way I'll discuss in just a second. The way that perfectionism, this is very nice how Mark has done this. This is not the way it looked when I turned it in. I love it. The way perfectionism manifests in a person often stems from a core negative thought about the self, right? So let's say somebody's afraid of being corrected at work, for example, even in a constructive way by their supervisor, because it activates the thought, either consciously or subconsciously, if it's not perfect, then that means that I'm not perfect. And that activates the thought, again, often on an unconscious level or subconscious level. Well, if I'm not perfect, then that means I'm not good enough. And then the thoughts of not being good enough would therefore mean that I'm no good. And if I'm no good, then and then you can fill in the blank here, because different people have different core negative thoughts at the root of their self-image. But what they all have in common is it's some kind of negative thought about the self, fundamentally, such as if I'm no good, then I'm a bad person, or I'm unworthy, or I'm unlovable, or I'm defective. It's things like that. And so perfectionism stems from this deep-seated core negative thought. Next, please, Margaret. And then if you're asking, well, in an individual person, where does perfectionism come from? How does it develop over the course of someone's life? This fellow Dave Barlow, who is one of the biggest names in cognitive behavioral therapy, contemporary CBT, has this triple vulnerability model. The idea being that any given person can have different vulnerabilities to anxiety. And if they have all three, then they end up with an emotional disorder like an anxiety disorder. So the biological vulnerability means that somebody is genetically predisposed potentially to having emotional distress, or they just have a lot of what used to be called neuroticism, sometimes called negative emotionality. They have a general psychological vulnerability, meaning not only are they sort of biologically vulnerable to being, upset, but there's some kind of invalidating circumstance in life, something about their environment that predisposes them to become anxious or emotionally distressed. And then they have a specific kind of environmental input that determines what form the emotional disorder will take. Next, please, Margo. And so, for example, if somebody just happens to be an emotionally sensitive person who gets angry or upset easily and takes a long time coming down to baseline and feels very, very intensely upset when they do get upset, and then you have an invalidating or an unpredictable childhood environment, which is the second, the general vulnerability. And then you have, for example, a parent who is highly critical. That's only one possible way that someone can become perfectionistic. Then you end up with this anxiety disorder with perfectionism. If you were to replace that gray star there, the specific psychological vulnerability with another form of trigger, like a parent who has concerns about body weight and is often critical about body weight, then you could end up with an eating disorder. So that's just a very flexible model for how emotional disorder gets formed, and many people have many triggers. But we're talking specifically about how anxiety disorders and perfectionism specifically can arise. Next, please.
So how does perfectionism affect us? And it can affect us in different ways. And most of the time we will see somebody who's just unable to focus and stay on the task of what it is that they're doing. And then when they get into that point where they're not able to focus, it's a really hard time to finish. It's, they're looking at the final product or the product they're actually creating. Is this good enough? Is this perfect? Is this the way I want it? Is this the way I envisioned it? And not being able to be present in the process of all of it. It's more of a focus of outcome rather than the process of what is this going to look like, rather than what am I doing here? How am I learning? How am I going to get, my thoughts down? And then somebody can become frozen. And some of the things that they might be saying to themselves is I don't know how to do this. This isn't what I wanted. It doesn't look right. Doesn't feel right. It has to be perfect and it isn't there. And all of these things can lead to distress and stress and anxiety.
So procrastination is another area that's so entwined with perfectionism that we wanted to specifically talk about the relationship. So procrastination, we hear a lot about it, but the way that we think about it in sort of the clinical psychology realm, or the way that Margot would think of it in the executive functioning realm, would be a manifestation that comes from perfectionism. Okay, so it stems from attempts to avoid the discomfort that comes with doing a task. Sometimes the potential for not getting the results you want, and as a result, you've got this dread or this discomfort, and the person wants to put off doing the task. And then when people are perfectionistic, the tasks take a whole long time to do. And also sometimes they're distressing. And so then people are more likely to procrastinate because, instead of taking 15 minutes to do an assignment, it takes, 4 hours. And it's, I don't want to do that. That's a pain in the butt. It lasts forever and it takes a toll on me. And that's one of the reasons why people tend to put them off. So there's this law in psychology, or this sort of very famous concept in psychology called the Yorkies Dodson curve, where the more stressed you are, you might assume the worse it is, but that's not actually true. The idea of the Yorkies Dodson curve is that there's actually an optimal amount of stress to have for proper performance. And if your stress is too low, if you're under aroused, then you don't do so well on things because you're not prepared for them. You're tired. You don't prepare, right? You're underprepared for things, and that's where procrastination can come in. And then if you're a little bit more stressed, then actually you're in the zone where you're kind of in an optimal performance state, and you practice, you prepare, you're ready for growth and learning. And then if your stress is too high, then of course you don't perform as well. You can screw up, you can shut down, and again you're at a higher level, higher risk for procrastination. So if you see, procrastination can come at both ends of the spectrum, both the under aroused and the over aroused. And in particular today, we're kind of focusing on the over aroused, the high stress manifestation of procrastination.
So procrastination, people misunderstand procrastination sometimes as a time management thing, but procrastination really isn't about time management. It's about a habit that people build over time. And basically what it is, it's an emotional regulation problem. It's about avoiding this bad emotion or this bad feeling that comes with whatever it is that you're needing to do. And the feeling could be boredom, anxiety, insecurity, frustration, self-doubt. There's so many different things it could be, or just plain and simply, it makes me feel bad. I'm not writing this paper because writing is hard for me and it makes me feel bad. So therefore, I'm going to put it off. I didn't study because it makes me feel bad that I don't really know how, or I didn't do whatever it might be, that's why you're avoiding it. So you're avoiding this feeling, this bad feeling, to go and do something that makes you either feel neutral or good. So you see a lot of kids these days, avoiding doing their work and going to play video games because it makes them feel good. And so that's where that procrastination comes in. They're avoiding that negative feeling and doing the thing that they know makes them feel good or even just neutral. And sometimes people have that battle between, I know I'm meant to be doing this, but I'm not going to. I'm going to go do this instead. I have plenty of time, or whatever they might be telling themselves. Procrastination, when you do this, it can create stress for yourself. Think about having a timeline, and your timeline, your due date is looming and it's coming closer and closer and closer. And as you get closer to that due date, your stress goes up and up and up. And so you're getting closer to this due date and your stress is higher. Your output is not going to be as good. Think about it. The more stressed you are, the worse the work is going to be. You're not going to be able to focus as well. You're not going to be able to, really come up with the concepts or whatever it is that you need to for whatever you're creating. So think about the stress and how it affects you or your child or whomever it is when they get closer and closer to that due date. This can also manifest itself in like physical responses with headaches and stomach aches, and just, some kids might even just be acting out, or you might feel irritable if you're procrastinating. And there's a reason behind all of this, and it actually kind of makes sense. So how do you overcome procrastination? First thing as first is, I'm a procrastinator. Hi, my name is Margot LaPointe and I'm a procrastinator. Just acknowledging that you do that. And then, ask yourself, why is this happening? Why am I procrastinating? And, start looking at it in a different way. Rather than not acknowledging it, acknowledge it. Look for patterns. Do you do it for the same thing that you do every time? Is it every time you write a paper, or is it every time you have math problem to do? Understand where it comes from. Is it a certain time of day? I know I'm a midday person, so I work best in the middle of the day. Some people work best at night and some people work best in the morning. Know that about yourself. So look to see when you're procrastinating and what it is for. And so once you've done that, get yourself ready, get yourself organized. What do you need in order to do all this? Do you have to do research? Do you need, the calculator, whatever it is? Plan that I'm going to do this. I'm going to do my homework every day at 4 o'clock, and I'm going to spend from 4 to 6 before dinner, making sure that I get as much of my work done as possible before I eat dinner. And do the preparation, make sure that you are home or in the place that you do your best work at that time, and practice. This is what it's about. You have to practice doing this over and over again, because we're going to mess up. We're not perfect. So we will mess up. And how do you recover when you mess up? And it's okay. Hey, I didn't get home at that time, but I got home here and I'm going to start immediately. And I'm going to push dinner back a half hour. Work on that recovery. I also love this last one is, tell someone so that they can hold you accountable. I know whenever I have a big goal for myself, I try to tell everyone about it, because then they all ask, how's that going? And I want to be able to say, it's going really well, or I've just started, or whatever it might be. But when you ask others to hold you accountable, either directly or indirectly, it is a motivator. It's a motivating factor for people.
So the first part of overcoming procrastination in the moment, right? Once you've sort of set up some of these things that Margot just mentioned for success, to sort of predispose you to success, is getting unstuck. It's getting that first little push that will start the ball rolling. And the method that I often like to use with my clients, I call it the smallest possible step method, which is just what it sounds like. Oftentimes when we put off a task, it's because we can't get that first step started. And of course, once we start it, oftentimes it's easier. So what I would recommend to my clients is when they're in that mode where they know they should start the thing, but they're not going to start it, right? I'm not going to do that. I would say, okay, just do the first possible step, the smallest possible step you could do real quick before you go and procrastinate, right? So oftentimes with kids, it's like schoolwork, right? So we talk about open up the computer, just open up your computer and open up the programs you're going to need for when you come back and decide to actually do the work. So, open up your web browser, your email, your, assignments, Microsoft Word or, Google Docs, whatever, just get that ready. That's an easy step, right? That in and of itself is not threatening because you know that you're going to go procrastinate in a second. So you can do that. And then I tell them, all right, now you've done that. Before you go do the next thing, just one more, do the next step, the next easiest thing, which could be, numbering the paper, putting the formatting on it, whatever, put the right, font and spacing, and you maybe put your name across the top and title it, whatever. And oftentimes, when we break that initial inertia, we actually get rolling with a task. And so before you know it, you're actually doing the task. So just keep doing the next smallest thing. And this can apply whether it's doing a bit of work, doing a chore that you have to do. Sometimes it's, I don't want to vacuum the floor. I'm going to go watch TV instead, but let me just take the vacuum out and hook it up, right? Unwind the cord, right? Anything like that. And then before you know it, you can actually overcome that inertia.
So strategies to get started. Just like Dan said, set up the mini goals. And he said the smallest possible. You can do the same thing, just like mini things of what's the first thing I want to do. And set up these goals of like, yay, I accomplished that. Like give yourself the pat on the back and be able to celebrate the small stuff. Make a plan. When am I going to do this? And as specific as you can be, it will help. And, I'm going to do it at this time on these days. And I'm going to set timers for myself to remind me to do it. And it can be a reminder, it can be a timer, however it might be. But keeping a schedule and a routine really helps with people getting started. And having that routine, especially with kids with homework, knowing that when they get home, they have a snack, they take a 30-minute break, and then at that specific time, whatever it might be for your child, that's when we get started on homework. And this is where you do your homework. You do it at this desk, and everything is there for you. Visualizing the end result, you hear a lot of professional athletes do that on their way to their event, is they actually visualize what they're doing. And, I've heard about skiers visualizing going down the mountains and making every turn and what it will feel like and flaring up their muscles. That works. And it's a real thing. And, visualizing how you're going to feel when your homework is done and you haven't even eaten dinner yet. It's, early in the afternoon or evening. And they have the rest of the afternoon or evening to do whatever else they can do with the family. Will be a really great thing. Using a timer to take breaks, learning how to take a proper break, a 3 to 5 minute break of get up, move your body and get back to it. And you can do it every 20 to 30 minutes. And it will help you be able to sustain your focus and stay with it. Not only just get started, but stay with it. So I talked earlier about performing tasks at the optimal time. It's the optimal time for you. And remember what works best for you. Big part of this is advocating for yourself, asking for what you need. And, as an executive function coach, I talk a lot about this with my clients about, what is it that you need? Are you given accommodations? If you are given accommodations, then use them. They're there to support you. It's not, to, make the teacher's life more difficult. And the teacher's meant to support you. And that's what's so important, is to make sure that these supports are being used and being used to the best possible way. And then asking for help. If you don't understand something, you don't know how to get started, go ask for help. The hard part is when somebody's procrastinated too much, it's really hard to ask for help because it's due the next day or it's overdue or however whenever it is due, but going in and asking can be difficult. I love email. Asking for help over email is a really great thing. Can we meet? Can you give me some strategies over email? Ask all the questions that you want on email. It's easier than face-to-face. And then establishing the routines, having that schedule, having the routine, and honestly doing it as much as possible every day, at least every weekday.
And sorry, Margaret, was this you?
Yeah.
Yes. Sorry, stepped on you.
So no, all good. So overcoming perfectionism, like this again, acknowledging the behavior. I know that I want this to look perfect. I know that I want this to be, the best it possibly can. And understanding what drives that behavior. Where is this coming from? And you may not know. And, doing the best you can to dive into it and to determine that. So when you're actually working on something, determine what you actually need rather than what you think you need. Because sometimes there's a difference. Sometimes it's, I want it to look this way, but I only need this for this specific thing. It doesn't have to be this extraordinary thing. I mean, I've read so much about, people in jobs and creating these presentations and then getting 3, 4, 5 people to work on these presentations and exhausting them when it wasn't necessary. And so that's the actual part of like, what do I actually need? And then going through the worst case scenario situations, like what would be the worst thing that would happen and how would I deal with that? Am I still okay? And understanding that. And sometimes you have to adjust your standards of like, I really want it to be this amazing thing, and then just bring it down to where it needs to be at that moment. And then also giving yourself reasons to move on. Creating time limits, I think, really works really well if someone is motivated to do this. And that's a big key factor here, is being motivated to overcome the perfectionism. So creating these time limits of, I'm going to work on this paper every day, each day, and I'm only going to give myself 45 minutes each day. During that 45 minutes today, this is what I want to do. And then I'm going to be finished for today. And tomorrow I'm going to work on it a little bit more. I, as an executive functions coach, like to have people chunk their work, do a little at a time, so that it's not this massive task that you need to overcome and to really do. So if you can just do a little bit at a time and learn how, when you hit that wall and you're frozen, to be able to say, I'm going to leave this part right now and move on to something else, and I'll come back to that. And then the biggest part about all of this is practice. You have to figure out what works best for you. And once you do, practice it over and over again so that you can become better at it each time. And each time you practice it, you may learn something different about yourself and alter and change the way you do things. And that's good. It's great.
At some point, somebody like Margot doing executive functions coaching might recognize that a student has a more deep-seated kind of anxiety or distress that's contributing to the perfectionism, and might need to refer to somebody like me or anybody else who can really address the kind of underlying emotional reasons behind the perfectionism. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about that. This might be a good time to address a question that came in. For somebody who's a perfectionist, does allowing for extra time on tasks, for example, tests, actually cause more distress? And the answer is a little bit complex, because somebody in my field would view 2 different kinds of distress. You have the distress in the moment that the person feels, and then you have the long-term distress. In other words, is it actually helping the person feel better over time, or is it maintaining the distress over time? And for somebody who has perfectionism, in the short term, allowing them extra time on, let's say, an SAT or something might actually be helpful for them, or sorry, make them feel better, right? It feels like it's helpful because they don't feel as pressured, they don't feel as anxious. However, in the long term, yes, it actually is causing more distress, because instead of treating the issue, the underlying issue, which I discussed a few minutes ago, you're sort of allowing that manifestation of the perfectionism to continue, which is kind of like a view perfectionism and checking and those kind of things as a ritual in order to make yourself feel better. But you need another hit of that next time, so it doesn't last that long. In order to overcome perfectionism, when we talk about the kind of emotional or psychotherapeutic ways to overcome perfectionism, and you could do some of these at home. Notice what the underlying thoughts are. I went over some of them earlier when we talked about the kind of the chain leading down to the core negative thought. Notice what negative thoughts might be under there. So what's the worst thing that would happen if you gave your child a birthday cake that was cracked or drooping on one side, right? For example, that's the sort of thing that you might have two different interpretations about. One of which is, it's a kid, he'll think it's beautiful anyway, and another one is, if the other parents see that my cake is not perfect, then they will think that I am sort of a lax mother, and if I'm a lax mother, and so forth, and then it goes down the chain to I'm not a worthy person or something like that. So notice what underlying thoughts might be there. And then one of the things that I would do therapeutically with somebody with perfectionism, and you could try this too, if the perfectionism is not to an extremely pathological extent, is to practice completing tasks in an imperfect way. Show off imperfect work product that you create intentionally imperfectly, right? So I might have a student who is an artist and who sort of takes 6 or 8 hours to complete a sketch, which would normally take them 1. I might have them draw a sketch in 30 seconds of something that they would usually need a few minutes to complete well. And I would have them hang it on the wall and let other people see it, right? And sit with that discomfort. And that discomfort that you have been pushing away with the perfectionistic tendencies can actually get better if you allow it to be there. And really, that's how anxiety treatment works, by and large. Notice the kinds of self-talk that you're doing when you create something that's not perfect. What do you say? Do you say, "Oh, I'm such an idiot," or like, "God, this looks terrible"? Notice that kind of talk, because the things that you say to yourself are going to affect how you feel at a deeper level. Don't say anything to yourself that you would not say to somebody else. If you wouldn't say to somebody else about their drawing, "God, that looks hideous," don't say it about your own drawings, right? And if you catch yourself saying it about your own drawings, that's okay, because it's automatic. But then I want you to reframe it and think about it as, okay, I did a drawing that is not perfect because I'm not perfect, and that's okay, right? That's helpful self-talk when it comes to perfectionism.
So again, self-talk, like how do you talk to yourself? Like even in EF coaching, a lot of times I'll ask kids, what are you saying to yourself? What are you saying? Is it positive? Is it negative? Is it neutral? Like, what are the things that you are saying and how are you being good to yourself? Like, can you reframe something that's negative, or this work is terrible? Instead of saying this work is terrible, what about saying, hey, this was really hard. I'm trying really hard, and I think I can do a little bit better. Just that little small tweak of adjusting the lens to make it so that you are being good to yourself. A lot of times I talk to my clients and say, would you ever say anything like that to a friend? And if a friend said that to you, would they still be your friend? And a lot of times the answer is no. So then why is it okay for you to say that to yourself? And that's when, my clients tend to start saying, oh, wow, I never really thought about it that way. And just start to notice how you talk to yourself. Notice what you're saying. And you can reframe in your own head. Ooh, that was not so nice. So let me think about another way. How can I put this in a way that's even just neutral? Doesn't have to be positive. It can be just neutral. It's just taking away from that negative self-talk.
So think about some other aspects of the self-talk, as you're reframing. Is it true that making a mistake really means that you're no good? Most people, not everybody, but most people would say, if they really examine that statement, well, no, of course not, right? And if a person is really attached to that statement and is unable to question it, right, and actually thinks that making a mistake really does mean they're no good, then that's one of the ways that we know that some concrete sort of professional help might be in order, some psychotherapy. Is it really a bad thing to ask for help? Right? Will you really get in trouble if you don't do well? A lot of kids who I talk to who have academic concerns, for example, will say, my parents will be mad at me if I don't make an A, right? And sometimes that's true. But oftentimes the imagined concerns are a bit inflated in the student's head, right? do I have to get all A's? Will that really affect my future? Am I really going to be homeless on the streets if I make a B in high school? Right? Does my work always have to be perfect? Do I always have to do more? Imagine, work, for example. If I don't take on every task that somebody asks me to do, is that going to be a problem? Do I really have to go above and beyond my calling, or my station every single time? And that sort of is a two-pronged kind of issue when it comes to our children, right? So not only do we have to worry about our own self-talk and sort of questioning our own assumptions, but when it comes time to questioning our children's assumptions, we should note that we are the models for children in terms of how they think about themselves. And we also do create contingencies for success and failure and anything in between. And so oftentimes children, whether we mean to or not, children have a sense of how our parents are going to react when we bring home a B or a C, or, and how are we going to respond to that? When a kid comes home and the parent says, "How did your test go?" Right? The parent is probably thinking, the kid was concerned about this and I am showing care, right? And of course, that is a caring question to ask. And sometimes kids take it as, my parent is really concerned about my grades. That's the first thing they ask me. And so, I'm not saying that you have to always walk on eggs, but certainly it is a good thing to ask about how you model perfectionism, or an acceptance of the imperfect, how you message when you talk to your children about grades or performance, right? And there's a whole spectrum of different possibilities between accepting failure as good enough and accepting nothing less than perfection, right? It is a healthy thing for our children to be able to say to themselves, if I make a D on something, my parents might not love it, but they will be supportive and help me problem solve the issue. And it's not the end of the world. It doesn't mean that I'm a bad kid or a dumb kid.
Yeah, can I go back to the asking for help is a bad thing? Is it asking for help a bad thing? A lot of my clients don't want to bother their teachers. They don't want to bother the professor. It's too, they don't want to help you. And we have a lot of conversations of, what's their job? As a teacher, their job is to teach you. And this is what you need to ask for. This is something that you need to learn. And their job is to teach all of the students in front of them. And asking for help is part of it all. And they don't like it, but they sort of understand it a little bit more and are maybe more willing to go and ask for help, at least send the email.
So I just wanted to answer a question that came up about, I was giving an example of how I might work on perfectionism in art. And let's talk about writing for a second. So imagine a student who does not procrastinate, but when they sit down, they spend endless hours writing an essay. I think this is where some of Margot's suggestions come in. Typically, when I deal with perfectionism in writing, I would typically ask a student, how long do you think this assignment should take? And maybe they say, whatever, 6 hours. And I say, how long do you think you would take to do it? And they would say, probably about 40 hours. And then I'd say, well, how long would it take your peers probably? How long do you think it takes your friends or whatever, your other kids in your class to do it? And they'll say 3 hours. So, all right, we set a goal. If we're just starting, we'd say, maybe I'm gonna have you do it in 4 or 5 hours, because this it should take about 3. Let's start it with 4 or 5. I want you to, you set a timer, you decide how long it's going to take you. Of course, you can break it up, right? You can do an hour here, an hour there. And we're going to focus on certain things and not other things. Certain things are more important, right? Having a good structure. And this is where somebody like Margot would come into play, of thinking, how do you really spend that time? What are you doing with that time? A good way to write an essay, not the only way, but a good way, is to spend a lot of the time on the actual structure and outline. And then maybe the other half of the time kind of fleshing in the outline. And then you've got a good first draft. And maybe that first draft should take you 2 hours and not 6. And so what I would often do with a student is ask them, what are they doing during that time? And it turns out that they are trying to phrase things perfectly on a first draft, or I don't like the way that sounds. I'm going to correct it. No, I'm going to redo it. No, I'm going to erase it entirely. And I would just have them work on getting the first draft out to get the message across and not worry about the phrasing. And then on their second draft, which again, they can time, they can work on correcting grammatical mistakes, correcting, issues of phrasing, things like that. And I often tell students there's a difference between this is incorrect grammatically in terms of what your teacher wants, or it doesn't make sense, versus, well, I don't like the way this sounds, right? And so I sometimes err on the side of, let's turn in maybe a A- paper as opposed to spending 45 hours on a short essay, because I'm a therapist. I'm not a tutor, and I'm not as concerned, although I used to do tutoring, right? I'm not as concerned that they have everything perfect, right? I'm concerned about them getting over an emotional disorder, and that tends to be my priority when it comes to that. And so oftentimes I do find that it's about rewriting and taking things out, and then when it's done, I say you get one final read through, polish, kind of attempt, and that's it. And anything that's still there after your final polishing attempt is going to be submitted. And I will sit there and submit it with them sometimes. Click send, right? And that's how we do that. Margot, is this you, the overcoming perfectionism?
Sure. So questions that you ask yourself about your work. So when you're sitting down, what do I need to do? And the biggest thing is like, do I know what I need to do, right? Do I understand what it is that I need to do? And going through the directions. What are my choices for how to do the task? Like, these are things that you have to ask yourself, like, do I have choices here? Do I have ways that I can do it in a different way? And if I don't, can I find another way? What do I need in order to actually do it? Like, what materials? Do I need a computer? Do I need, do I have to write it out? And how much time do I need to do it? A lot of my clients, I work on making estimates about how long do you think this will take you to do? And someone who's a perfectionist, I might ask the same question that Dan said. So how long do you think it should take you to do this? How long do your peers take to do this? How long would you like to take to do this? And then what do you need? What are the steps that you need in order to do it? And go through the steps and then put it down to little small steps. Like, let's look at, the outline, and then start taking the outline and making it into a draft. And what should I do first? What's the very first thing? And then start with the simplest things and keep going one thing after another and breaking it down into small tasks. And when I think I'm done, did I do all the tasks? And did I do everything that I said that I was going to do? And the last question is, how did I do with it all? Like, did I accomplish all the things that I created here for my work? Can I hand this in? Am I comfortable with this? So all this, remember, the biggest thing is that we are a process. This is not the end product for all of us. I'm a big believer in the process. And whatever we're doing, we're going to make mistakes doing it as we go. Forgive yourself, be flexible, know that you are going to do some things well and some things not as well. And allow yourself to focus on overcoming the task without the burden of the past. Like, start looking into the future. This is what I would really like for myself, and this is what I'm striving for, to be able to feel that way at the end and to be able to do the best that I can. It doesn't have to be perfect, but of the best that I can. And practice that self-compassion for yourself. Treat yourself with kindness and understanding, and watch your self-talk, making it, either neutral or positive for yourself.
I wanted to go back and extend a little bit more Kristen's question about the student who is writing a lot, because she specified that the worry under that is, I'm going to get a bad grade and then not go to not go to a good college. And if it is true, as I said, that perfectionism is both sort of a surface level kind of thing you're doing with your tasks, and also has this underlying component of core negative thoughts and this sort of thing, it's also important to address the underlying thoughts and address the underlying thoughts behind those underlying thoughts, right? So, what does it mean to go to a bad college? What does the student think is a good college versus a bad college? Is a good college for a particular student only an Ivy League college? It's becoming more and more clear that that's not really the case. And if you question a student about what makes it a bad school, and then so what are your attitudes about people who go to a quote unquote bad school, right? I mean, I guess there are predatory schools out there, but oftentimes the schools that students are really worried about being stuck with end up being perfectly good schools where they're going to make a perfectly good life for themselves and have a lot of opportunities and meet a lot of great connections. And oftentimes it's the attitudes about what it means to go to this school or that school that bring up some of these fears. Another question that relates to this is one that Nicole asked, and I think it's great that she asked it, because I wanted to get more into this in terms of the therapy angle. If core negative beliefs are sort of underlying these thoughts, and you recognize what the core negative belief is, like, I am worthless, right? How is it best to address them? And therapists do this kind of work with clients. A lot of the work that therapists do, whether they use this cognitive behavioral framework or not, is attempting to change core negative beliefs that a person has about themselves. But if you have a sense of your own core negative beliefs, or of your child's, even some kids come out with it, I'm worthless, right? I'm no good, nobody loves me. Then you can, a couple of ways to do this, right? Again, this is sometimes best left to professionals, and other times you can really do this work on your own, where you can sort of say, what is fueling this core negative belief? Why do I feel worthless? Where are these messages coming from? Sometimes kids say these messages come from the outside, from their families, and families don't intend to deliver these messages. Sometimes it's about the child just interprets it that way. Sometimes it's about helping kids challenge that core negative belief by changing their environment, or allowing them to do new things that challenge the belief. A core negative belief of I'm powerless, right? I've worked with that before, and I've suggested that families teach children, how to cook for themselves, let them stay alone for short periods of time when, at age appropriate, just to feel like I could fend for myself, 15 minutes when the parent runs down the street, taking a self-defense class. These are all different ways to feel less powerless if, the core negative fear is about being alone, being scared, being powerless. But, it depends on, the intervention depends on what the core negative belief is.
Can I add on a good book for anyone who's looking at college-bound students? Is Where You Go Is Not Who You'll Be by Frank Bruni. It's a great read about, all different colleges and different universities that kids go to and how they work for them.
I just wanted to, a quick question. Ali asked, how are OCD and perfectionism linked? Is it sort of a one or the other or both kind of thing? Think of perfectionism as a symptom that is often found in cases of OCD, very, very often, but doesn't have to be there in OCD. And perfectionism is a symptom that comes in other forms of anxiety disorders as well. So I've seen social anxiety with perfectionism, right? People afraid of judgment by other people, and that's why they are perfectionistic. Or generalized anxiety disorder can have perfectionism. But yes, it is a very common trait to see with OCD.
Anyone have any more questions?
Margaret, you might want to take this one. So Susan asks, how do you help your kids separate doing it to their standard, which is above and beyond what the teacher expects, and what is still very good work, right? So separating, helping a kid see that there's two different standards here, and theirs might not be the most realistic.
Well, one of the things that I would have them do is go and meet with the teacher about what is actually expected, and I would have the child write down what they heard from that. And I'd also have the teacher write down what they're saying from that, so that they have something tangible to take away with them when they're actually working on what it is that they need to be doing. So making sure the expectations are realistic and within the realm of what the teacher is asking for, rather than what they are looking for.
Sally, oh, hi, Sally. what are some recommendations you might have to address the body awareness and to move through those? These can be thoughts, but also feelings to recognize in the body. Margot, do you ever do any of this kind of work with clients involving sort of physiological sensations and body awareness?
I do a little bit, but most of it is about like being able to focus and stay with something. So I talked about the proprioceptive and the vestibular senses. And if you can merge both those senses together when you're taking a break, you can actually increase your ability to focus and sustain your focus for a longer period of time. So the proprioceptive sense is engaging your joints and muscles, and the vestibular sense is basically changing, moving your head either up and down or side to side. So if you can engage both of those things at once, like doing a jump squat would engage both, or sitting on a yoga ball and jumping up and down in the sit position, and doing, even just 10 of them and then getting back to work will help you be able to sustain your focus for a longer period of time.
Great. I do some of this work as well when it comes to exposure work. So just so you know, if you're doing anxiety therapy from a cognitive behavioral perspective, as I do, you end up doing a lot of what's called exposure work, where you sort of intentionally bring up the feelings and thoughts that are uncomfortable and sit with them and sort of manage them in a different way instead of pushing them away. And so this is a very important one for procrastination, because a lot of people who procrastinate don't recognize that they are avoiding something because of emotional reasons. If you ask them, especially young people, they say, well, because it's just, just don't want to do it because it's more fun to do this other thing. But if you actually look at what behaviors they are procrastinating with, they're often less enjoyable things. Like I'm scrolling through social media, and sort of looking at memes, and you ask, well, how much do you value that activity? And often it's not that much. They're sort of doing this in a very kind of apathetic way. And so it does turn out that if you ask somebody to really pay attention to the thoughts and sensations that come up as they begin the smallest possible step method, where they're actually moving toward doing the thing that they have been putting off, they begin to feel those sensations in their body that they often don't recognize come up. And I ask them to pay attention to what actually happens and what are you thinking about and what are you feeling. And if they're coming closer to the computer and opening up their programs, and I ask them to pay attention, they often feel the dread as a physical sensation, let's say in their chest or stomach or head. And I ask them to notice those. And once you are able to really label those things and observe those things in a kind of a present focused, curious way, they become less scary and you can tackle them more. And so it often really does come down to mindfulness, right? Or being aware of the sensations and being able to label them and describe them. And speaking personally, I have a particular feeling that I know what it feels like when I've been putting off a thing, and then I go over to the thing. And if I recognize that feeling, oh, there's that feeling again. That's not so bad. I can get through that feeling. Margot, the question from Susan: is there a plan or a program where a kid can meet with an EF coach on a daily basis until better habits and thought patterns develop?
So yes, Susan, we offer executive functions coaching. We tend to do it on a weekly basis because we want kids to actually put into practice the things that we talk about. We also follow up with texts, and we can always do mini conversations throughout the week. But generally, we tend to do it once a week.
Let me interject. I'm going to pause the recording. We're welcome to continue this as long as the questions persist, but I'm just going to stop this right now so that'll be